What happened today was a bombshell of a confession dropped by the state. There were multiple confessions, but there was one that was way above all the others. We heard from Richard Allen's prison psychologist, Monica Walla, today. He confessed to murdering Libby German, age 14, Abigail Williams, age 13. He did that over and over, but there was one time that was by far the most important. We're going to cover all of them, but particularly that one tonight. The reason it was so much different from the others and nothing else was even close, it had the right timing. It matched the facts that we know. It had details, and one detail in specific that the state managed to trace down and present with the witness today. It was truly a huge day for the state. But the defense had an absolutely amazing cross-examination of Dr. Monica Walla. It was really well done and clearly proved he was in mental breakdown during the period of time when he was confessing. Will that one confession with all of the detail in it, will that be enough to convict Richard Allen? Or will the jury say he was in bad shape, he was mistreated during that period, and we can't trust the confessions, even that one? That is ultimately, I would say, if you could almost take everything else out of the case, and that's how important today was. That's how important this one confession is. It's all important. It's what probably will ultimately decide the case in the minds of the jurors. So we have to cover this. It's going to be a big night. So hopefully you can all see me, and audio is fine. Oh, great. Is it still blurry? Please. Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I redid. So anyway, my apologies. I will try one other thing. Sorry for the, nope. I don't think that made any difference. I'll check all my connections just in case. All right. Well, that's what I can do. Last time, by the way, it just popped up clear later. Like nothing can be done about that. I don't have any idea what that was about. All right. So everything that I know to do done. All right. So let's keep going. These confessions, I think, are the most important thing. We're going to cover those tonight, and especially the ones they did today. There were one other witness. Tomorrow, we hear that the prosecution is going to rest after one witness. So tomorrow afternoon or Friday, the defense is expected to begin its case. And then we understand it might be fairly short. This may all come to an end within about the next week. So one thing I would ask, we do need line sitters. Thank you so much to Jen, to Jolene, to Ralph and Rose, to Melissa from yesterday. Thank you so much for all the people who've been sitting in and helping with the line sitters. And we need a few more. The link to how to sign up for that is in the description below. All right. Well, let's go. So Dr. Monica Walla was up. The judge, oh, this was so amazing. This was truly amazing. Speaking of technical, you know how difficult it is to hear in the courtroom. It's almost impossible. So annoyingly, every time the prosecution gets up, they say to the witness, see that microphone in front of you? Pay no attention to that, because that's only for the people in the audience. Speak up loudly for us. Don't worry about the microphone. Don't speak into the microphone. No need to do that. Well, today, even worse than that, the witness sat down and pulled the microphone toward her, and the judge said, no, move that microphone away from you. So it was, once again, almost impossible. She spoke like a few words into the microphone, totally clear, and then she moved it. For the men, they're up so high, taller men, that they're speaking right into the microphone, but the women are like, the microphone is like out here and pointed up above them. So it's of no use at all. So in 2022 to 2023, Monica Walla was a lead psychologist at the Westville facility where Richard Allen has been incarcerated. She began to see Richard Allen from the time he got there in November of 2022. And they did, it was crazy. They went through all of these confessions, and then they moved backwards into his behaviors, and then they moved forward and backwards. So it goes like this all through the day. I'm going to take it in the order that it was done at trial, because I think that will be the easiest for me to explain to you. But I'm going to be adding this back into the timeline. In fact, we'll do a whole separate section on the confessions. I may even do a separate video on the confessions and looking at what his behaviors were, because it's so critical. Are all of his confessions undermined by the way he was treated? Or do we have to just accept that some of the facts he knew could not have been known by anyone who had not actually murdered Libby and Abby? So that's what we will be thinking about throughout this. So at the time he was admitted to the facility, to Westville, he was not, of course, he's still not, convicted of any crime. And he was instead someone who was being placed there for safekeeping. In other words, because they were afraid of his mental health, that maybe he would try to harm himself or try to do something that would create danger for himself. And they didn't want that, so they were putting him in this facility. However, it was a very restrictive facility. And ultimately, the overview of this is he was kept in solitary confinement for more than a year. Far, far more than the recommended absolute maximum guidelines would permit. The judge did not allow the defense to use what they wanted to use. They wanted to use a study and a report within the state of Indiana that says how long people can be in solitary confinement and cuts it off. The judge didn't allow that, kept that out. And as a result, they didn't have that to cross-examine with. But even so, she admitted that for somebody like Richard Allen, that it would still be extremely important. So he was she talked about, moved straight to that time period last time when we talked yesterday about all of the guards who were reporting on confession after confession after confession. And on April 5th, she talked about that as well. They had regular monitoring that was being done by people who were watching him daily. At this point, it was inmates. On April 5th, he was being seen daily by her office, and monitoring was happening of him all the time. He was moved to an unaliving watch, where he was moved from constant observation, which is all the time, and then he had been moved to close observation, which is every 15 minutes somebody checks, to close observation. So it went back and forth like that. He was placed on unaliving watch again on April 5th. And at this point, there was someone constantly outside his door, and they do that only in severe cases. She talked about the facility, which holds many people. Richard Allen's cell is the most restrictive cell within the entire place. And so this particular restrictive cell is for people who are on have mental health issues. But as a result, it's also very difficult for somebody who has mental health issues, the irony of it all. So at one point in April, she talked to him about I told you they went back and forth. This is November. In November, when he got there, she talked to him about, don't discuss your case with anybody because you don't have a public defender appointed yet. And so you haven't even talked to your lawyer. So be careful talking to other people about your case. And this question was asked, and did you believe Mr. Allen knew the dangers of talking? And she said that answer may be different at different points in time. So important, because she was saying, yeah, it's granted, it may be true that he at times knew that was dumb, but there were times when I'm not really sure that he was mentally capable of understanding what he was doing. She was asked, was he intelligent? She said yes. So we'll pop into the confessions. On April 5th, he said, I killed Abby and Libby. Fairly clear. He became tearful and said he committed the murders on his own. He said he made sure they were dead because he did not want them to suffer. And he said no one helped him. He said he knew they were dead, made sure they were dead before he left the scene. He said his intentions were sexual in nature, and he said he thought they were older than they were. He thought they were 18 or 19. He had no idea that they were children, ages 13 and 14. Why? Why would he do this? The answer was he'd been selfish all his life. He was a coward, and he took their lives to preserve his own. He said in retrospect, he wanted to apologize to the families and wished he could go back and change his actions. He said that he had inappropriately touched his sister as a child, that he had experimented with male and female children his age, and that's where the problem began. He also admitted alcoholism since 2011, but said his wife cared for him. All right, let's talk a little bit about that particular confession, because it has some details in it, but not necessarily details. There would be details about motive, for example, but not really details that would be unique to the crime, that would be only known to the killer. You've got, for example, the fact that they were dead before he left the scene. That's probably true. You've got the fact that he made sure they were. You've got the fact that he did it on his own and that he killed them. But none of that is really something that is specific to the crime. That's the confession we're going to get to in just a minute. All of this, if he were deranged, in theory, he could say each of these things knowing nothing more about the murder. Each one of these things he could just think of knowing that the murder occurred if for some reason he was driven mentally insane for a period of time. All right, the next confession, moving backwards, I told you this was all crazy. March 21st, he asked if Dr. Walla believed in God. He said he hoped everyone would find God before they died. He hoped he could convince the families of Libby and Abby. He said he would, I didn't write out to what. I don't think to believe in God. I think it was maybe to forgive him or just to so he wanted to confess. He said he would go back and undo his actions if he could. He said he was happy to see his family and to have a small view of the outside world, which, by the way, we learned was a very small window up high and partly obscured that looked directly onto a fence of some type. He said he was happier than he had ever been, considering he was in such a terrible place. That the whole concept of religion and being religious was new to him. He asked for Bibles. He asked to see the chaplain. He even slept with his Bible. And he had concern for Walla's own faith. Wanted to know, was she a person of faith? Did she know? So what Dr. Wallace says is, listening to all of that, she believed he was potentially feigning, pretending, just making up that he was really desperately off, that he really believed these things or really had these problems. She was just feigning. He was doing some crazy things around this time. He was drinking water out of the toilet. He said he was delirious from not eating. She said, well, this sudden change, this sudden religion, that could be just sort of manipulation. That was back in March 21st. She said, when you looked at him, his appearance was within normal limits. In other words, he looked pretty normal. He would sometimes intensely stare for a long time. His mental status was very labile, meaning his emotions went way up and then they went way down. And his thought process was he would go off on tangents and just kind of have to be brought back, or maybe couldn't. But as far as, it was interesting because the prosecution got into all this. Yeah, he was, acting really weird. But as far as committing the murders, now that portion, the state says, was concise and in order. So again, this was really vague, though. Just all it was the idea that he would undo his actions if he could, that he wanted to see Abby and Libby's families and things along those lines. So there wasn't anything that would be something only a person with knowledge of the crime would know. It's all still fits in the category of things that if somebody went absolutely crazy, maybe that's what they would think. So on May 2nd, 2023, he said, I killed Abby and Libby. I will kill everybody. I will wipe out the whole world. And he mentioned starting World War III. He asked to know, is it okay to K himself? I'll use abbreviations. That inmates say I should. So does that mean make it right? Can I do that? And he said he didn't want to die. He said he would climb onto the stake and would unalive himself. All of this was crazy and all over the place. That was her point. That he said he K'd his entire family and his best friend, which is untrue because they're there at trial. I don't know about the best friend, but his wife anyway. and that he was too much of a coward to Kay himself. He said during this period of time, as signs of mental illness, he was consuming his own feces. He was drinking the toilet water. And the reason for that, he explained, was because he was afraid he wouldn't have water to drink. He was told, well, that doesn't make sense. And he said, I know. He was having difficulty staying on topic. And he said he will or he won't unalive himself. He kind of went back and forth so that it was difficult, I guess, to categorize him because he was saying both. That he was, and then he said he randomly asked for a drug test, even though he's in prison and in solitary confinement, and so very unlikely to have been anywhere near drugs. He may have been wondering if someone was drugging him. Maybe that was his issue or question. So he was provided a tablet when he came faster than normal, and he broke it. So what they're trying to do is explain, why might he have been in this situation where maybe he is like this, where is he getting all the things he's supposed to get? And they're saying, yeah, he initially got a tablet and then he broke his own tablet. So as to the toilet water, they explained that they may possibly have cut off his water because at one point he was stuffing, I believe it was his Bible, into his toilet and it overflowed. And so sometimes when that happens, they cut off the water. And so maybe that's why he suddenly didn't have water. And maybe he was confused about why that was happening. But she said it would never be taken away punitively. In other words, just because they wanted him to not have water. So she called this a brief psychotic disorder with situational stressors and said he was grossly disorganized. So on May 3rd of 2023, he said he would like to confess to his crimes. He said he saw his parents that morning, that very morning, that he was supposed to eat with them. That instead, and so this is very, very specific. Am I totally at the right one? Yep, I'm at the total right one. So, okay, everybody listen up. This is huge, absolutely huge. All right, so he said he went to see his parents that morning. That is exactly what he had told the police before now. He said he was supposed to eat and with them, but they were going to go eat. Instead, he opted to go get a 6-pack and he drank 3 beers and then he had more later. It wasn't exactly clear when the later was. Was it before the murders, after the murders that he's confessing to? It's not really super clear. So he bundled up, that he saw the girls and he followed them to the bridge. He said that he did something with his gun and that he thinks that's where the bullet that they found fell out. That's not where the bullet was that was found. The cartridge that was found was between the feet of the 2 girls at the scene where their bodies were found. It was not where they were abducted, which was ways away at the end of the Monon High Bridge, or at the, right as it comes off back onto land, overland. They then went down the hill, across some land, across the creek, up the hill, and into a not really clearing, but sort of flatter place. That's the prosecution theory. So he said that he thought his gun, he must have dropped the bullet back up on the bridge area where he was first taking them. He said he ordered them down the hill, that he planned to rhymes with grape, that he thought they were older. And here is the most important part because it's very unique, that he saw a van and this startled him. Remember how from opening statements, the prosecution has been talking about how he was interrupted, like interrupted. How do they know? What did that come from? Here's where it came from, right here. He's saying that there was a van and he wanted to make sure that they were dead, that he covered them with branches. So I'll go back. Let me talk about that van just a minute. We're going to get more information about that from another witness. But this witness said Alan said he saw a van. It startled him. And that was why he then interrupted, did not follow through with the SA that he was going to do, but instead he murdered the girls. And I guess that would tie in with why he said it was to protect himself. Maybe he thought he was about to be discovered. He said he covered the girls with branches, that he did not exit by the trail because he didn't want to be seen. And he managed to then just continue living life. And as time passed, it just kind of seemed to go away. Like, he did say, though, that he appeared, she said, the doctor did, that he just appeared relieved after that. Like, okay, I told somebody it's all done. She said, she was asked, did you prompt him? Did you ask him? And she said, no, I didn't prompt him. I didn't ask him. He just volunteered this, and I wrote down what he said. He was concerned about not getting food or water, and he also asked about a transfer to another facility. He explained that the reason he had eaten his own feces was because he was afraid of telling the truth. Which, boy, that could go deep on bunches and bunches of levels. There's some Freudian stuff for you. Feel free to diagnose and try to figure that out. That he wanted his wife to know that he loved her if he died. And he repeated that he did it, and he didn't want to miss Easter. So you can see that this is so mixed up all through here. Oh, and by the way, during this part, the maximum, most important point, right? We've been waiting for this confession. This is the one. And somebody had a coughing fit in the audience. I was like, oh, no. So it took a group. There were 5 of us sitting around like, well, I thought I heard this. Well, I thought I heard that. And we kind of pieced it together. So this is what I think we all heard. But I will tell you what, it took a lot of work to get to that. So the whole issue of this confession is a mess. It is an absolute mess because it's mixed in with this crazy behavior, which is eating feces, the flooding, stuffing the Bible down the toilet, flooding the place, getting the water turned off, being afraid he's not going to get food and water. All of this is nuts. And suddenly he doesn't want to miss Easter. All of this, although it is pretty close to Easter time. So, there's just all of this craziness going on. And then you have the confession plunked into that. And you have them talking about, well, maybe he's mixing up stuff. He's intentionally looking crazy. Why? Why is he looking crazy and confessing? To me, those don't go together. Either he looks crazy. Okay, I'm with you. He could be feigning. He could be making it up. But if he's so savvy that he can do that, then he's not somebody who's going to be confessing. And if he's somebody who's confessing, he's not clear in his head enough to be doing the other. So I don't really see how that works. But in this particular case, we have a huge mess on our hands. The jury has a huge mess on its hands because the defense is absolutely correct that he is in a terrible mental state, that he is not right in his head. And the prosecution has this bombshell confession with a fact buried in it about that van. The van that interrupted him. And they are going to talk about that van some more. We're going to have a final witness, maybe even bigger than this witness, but wouldn't have meant anything without this witness. So it was a very big deal. All right. So, I do think the prosecution cannot successfully say that the confession was well organized, but he was crazy. This is a mess. This is very hard to parse out. There's not an easy, clear answer here. I do think the defense has a lot of points about the way he was treated and about how he was losing his mental capacity. So on May 9th, 2023, he said, I just want to sign my confession. And she said, well, you might want to talk about that with your attorneys. He mentioned harming of himself. He talked about his last meal. He did say he wanted to help others and he asked for a job. So you can see this is, I won't be around. Here's my last meal, but I want to help others. So get me a job and I'll get to work. And then he went back to no, he'd be better off if he weren't around. It just crazy. Then the next day he was wanting to call his wife and he'd been unable to use that tablet that he had now had back in his cell. And so they tried to call once and Dr. Walla left the room during his session. She got special permission for that. She left the room, but it didn't connect through. So she came back in and they did manage to get it to connect. And he said to her, I want you to hear this so you understand. He said he wanted to call her back, his wife, and tell her that I did it. So he made another call and he asked if the family still loved him. And he said he was going to be spending the rest of his life in prison. And he said the last time he would see her would be in the electric chair. And his wife said, stop, just stop. And he said to Dr. Wallace, she doesn't believe me. She's not believing me. And then he made this statement, I didn't do all I said I did, but I did kill Abby and Libby. Mess, because he is confessing over and over. And, you know, it's all through the record and they've got it in, and it's not just Dr. Wallace, it's the witnesses from yesterday. So it's a lot. But she concluded he was organized, coherent, and not in psychosis at this point. Then 2 days later, was that the 10th or the 9th? That was the 10th. So the next day, he said how he was feeling about the crimes. He said, I really just want closure. I want to apologize to the families, and said he was going to be seeing his wife. He wasn't really sure what this closure he wanted would look like, but that's what he wanted to do, apologize to the families. But she said he was oriented, but then on the other hand, he was claiming, she used the word claiming, not to know the date. So oriented, but they think that he's pretending. That she said that. I think he's pretending. There's a huge gap then, and we skip to August 3rd. So we move from May 11th to August 3rd. And on August 3rd, he says, I want to go to heaven. I want to talk to my wife. I want to see my family. I feel my heart is going to split. He said he fears something happened to him, and he wants something happening to him that it could, and that he wants to say goodbye to his family. He said he wasn't sure what was rational, that he was confused. He didn't know if he was not calling his wife or about his tablet. He said, I need to let my wife go. I'm a burden. Again, more confusion. The important point of this is that these statements are happening. And by the way, that part about the burden, that was yet a flashback to an earlier time that she was discussing, but everything else about fearing something was happening and not knowing about whether he was rational and feeling confused, that was all on August 3rd. So he's already receiving treatment. He's receiving medication and Haldol, and he's been getting better. And yet he's still talking kind of out of his mind. That's not impossible. I mean, he is in solitary confinement and was for more than a year. That is absolutely, you can imagine how difficult that would be on anyone. So the defense has points there. So then they flipped back to November, the year before, when he first got there, and talked about how at first he was refusing some meals, but she felt like he was really gaming the system. They have a rule that if you miss 4 meals, it has to be reported. So he was, quote, very careful not to miss that 4th meal. He'd skip 3, but then have 1. And that he was actually kind of pleased with the weight loss, but he had a dramatic, massive weight loss that was brought up by the defense when they tried to get him moved from the Westville Correctional Facility. So then on the 10th of November, he refused to come out at times. He said he was a burden. They encouraged him to come out for visits and talked about being careful, not communicating with other people. He hadn't been assigned a public defender. And then they flip forward to April again. We'll get it all straightened out on our timeline. For now, I'm going to cover it like it came out at the trial. And this is really how it came out. So we're now at April 7th again. He says he's aware he's confessed. And the doctor said, I told him you confessed. He said, I told him it was not in his best interest, and it might be against the advice of his attorneys. He really needed to talk to them. He said she felt like he was, quote, being more blatant with his symptoms and bizarre behavior. In other words, she really felt like he was faking, that he was oriented. He had claims of memory loss, but she felt like he was feigning his symptoms. There was one day in April and we had heard of that April 10th day before, where he was feigning his symptoms. She felt like he had his back against the wall, was raising and lowering his arms over and over, I guess like this, and that he was not responding to his name. And there was paper all over the floor. This was critically important because the paper strewn all over the floor were his legal papers, the discovery he had gotten. And this is the linchpin to the defense, to all of this. The defense says those papers scattered all over the floor, that was the discovery. And that's how he knew those facts. He knew those facts. He knew about cutting their throats. He knew about maybe even the van because he had all that discovery. He knew about the crime scene. So he made up, in his psychosis, he made up this whole event around it that he dreamed / made it up because he was incoherent emotionally and mentally. That's their argument. So these papers strewn all over his cell, these were the discovery, the legal papers his lawyers had sent him, which they sent him in early April. That's when he received them. And that they were so concerned, the jail was, about other people learning what was in the discovery, that they switched at that point from inmates being his one-on-one check sitting outside his door to the guards then took over that work. And they did that from then on. So, and in fact, his first confession, all of this kind of dovetails, his first confession, they said, was on April 5th. The previous day he had confessed, well, okay, previous day. So the 4th, he had been confessing to other people. And that was right around the time that he received this discovery. So they believe all of those details he knew because he had crime scene photographs, he had crime scene discovery, and he was able to fill in those gaps. The warden said he didn't want anybody to see it, and that's why he stopped having inmates with him. Inmates were apparently leaking information about Richard Allen because he was kind of, I guess, a celebrity inmate. And so they would tell people, oh, yeah, hey, I'm watching Richard Allen, you know, he's bridge guy. And people would have heard that. And so they thought it's a really good idea to get everybody out of there who might possibly do this. Let's have only prison guards from now on. Those are the people we heard from yesterday who testified to all the confessions they heard, mostly right around this beginning of April timeframe. So Dr. Wallace said she too had seen a shift in the behavior after they received discovery, and she observed that. She saw clearly he was one way before the discovery and one way after. I will say this. That's not entirely impossible to think that that would be something that would happen. I will say I was very affected by seeing the crime scene photographs. So I can certainly imagine they would affect somebody. So if he is totally losing it, then I can see where it would also be very emotional for him to see them, whether he committed the crime or not. It's going to be very impactful on his mental health. So on the 12th, he was banging, kicking the door, self-pleasuring, and continued doing that even after she was present at the door. He was looking at the camera, touching himself, rolling around, not wearing clothes, and so wouldn't wear his kimono, which is how they described the garment that you have to wear at all times if you are on suicide watch. Dang, use the word unaliving watch. Okay, and that Walla, the doctor, spent a whole hour trying to coax him into, come on, put on your clothes because we can do our session out here if you do that. They went to a cage. They walked him in shackles and chains and on a leash to a cage 3x3 where he sat divided by a divider from the doctor. But at least it was out, you know, at least it was something. And he also couldn't do his rec because he wasn't wearing clothing. And she said she was suspicious that he was doing it in order to get something, but she didn't know what. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. On the 13th of April, it was escalating. She said he was lying in his own feces. He was consuming his own feces. The psychiatrist talked to him to offer medication, try to get him, how about you take this? Wouldn't do it. Not interested. So at that point, they didn't think he was yet eligible, but later decided, yeah, we're going to give him involuntary medication. So he was given at that point Haldol without, just because they felt like he needed it. He had an emotional breakdown due to the discovery materials, guilt and loss, or secondary gain, by which she meant wanting something, like wanting to get transferred to a different / better prison, like wanting to get more time out so that he would not be in solitary. Somehow that he believed he was going to get something if he acted wacky as he was doing. And she did say he was getting little to no sleep. So on the 17th, he was in the middle of his cell with his eyes closed and one hand raised, close to naked, speaking or mouthing words. She said, maybe praying. And they would call his name and there was no response. He was acting bizarrely and then he would just stop. Now, she took that as a sign that this is made up. He's just pretending. He'll act wacky and then be, no, I'm fine. So it said he was separated from reality. This is what he said. And he wanted to go back and make things right. She said, they asked her, did he have coherent thoughts at this time? And she said she hesitated this really long time. Sometimes I'm trying to write. Sometimes you're like, wait, did I miss? Did they hit pause? But she finally said, I would say yes. But she really was struggling to say, yeah, he had coherent thoughts. He did some vulgar and disgusting thing and said, well, that's not who I am. He said, the last I remember, I fell asleep. And when he woke up, it was nuclear war that had been activated by his death. So I guess that may be why he was afraid to sleep, because it would create nuclear war in his mind. He was singing, marching, crying. But when you asked him what you had been doing, he provided a list of behaviors, and those were in some part correct, which was kind of funny. For the state, good enough. That's a low bar right there. If people ask you what you're doing and you can tell them something that's correct, in some part you're correct, good enough. Your confession works. That is a very low bar, I have to say. So on the 14th of April, after he had some meds, he did have some improvement, although he was still very sleep deprived. Oh, look at this. All this time. Well, maybe this will be clearer now. We'll see. He had grossly disorganized speech. Then on the 21st, he had bizarre behaviors that were documented. She believed they were not genuine. Then on the 25th of April, he said, I think I want a transfer. That is where the state draws a lot of its conclusions. The fact they say that all this behavior was just a lead up to what he wanted, that secondary gain where he was going to get moved out of this prison to a far better one or closer one or something. Certainly they felt like where he was a bad situation. His lawyers felt like that. I think his wife felt like that, his family. I think everyone on his side believed that. Then on the 28th, he was lying on his bed naked and asked if I wanted a psych session, but said, I need to shower first. And she thought that was a good sign because he was aware he wasn't in condition to come out either to do rec or to do the psych, that meeting that they had. And he realized, I need to do something. Maybe this has gone too far. He said, he was asked, well, why aren't you taking care of yourself? Why aren't you doing sort of basic clean up things? And he said, I'm selfish. That was his explanation for that. He went on about flushing his Bible down the toilet, not having food or water. She says that's false. And that was the part where she talked about how perhaps he had flooded. And sometimes when they do that, they cut the water off. But she said they're not cutting water off to keep him from drinking. On the other hand, you can see where in the mind of somebody who is in solitary confinement and can't get out, cutting off the water to the room would be a terrifying thing, because now you're dependent on people coming and showing up with water since there's nothing there. And that isn't how it's been happening. You haven't needed that. You've had the water right there in your room. So we moved into Cross. Now let me say a few thank yous. Thank you, Mr. Burt Wayne. I sure appreciate that. Ben Sellers, I could not agree with you more. This case has been on my mind all day, and it's unbelievable that something like this could happen to two innocent girls in broad daylight. And I've been to the park now, and it's just beautiful and peaceful. And it seems you just can't even imagine that this would happen. You really can't. It's hard to even picture that. Chris J.O., welcome as a new member. And Bernie, having a lawyer league going global. That's awesome. Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate that. And I do too. I think this truth, transparency, and justice matters a great, great deal. And thank you, Martha. I appreciate that. Archer Girl is a new member, and we will stop right there. Okay. So cross-examination of was by Rosie. he has handled all of the witnesses related to the confessions, all of the guards. I guess he would have done the inmates if they had come. The warden, he did all of those. They seem to have kind of divided it up by category. That's normally how they would do it with a group handling the case like this. So he said, and at this point, things are definitely looking bad. That one confession, it's hard. We are going to talk about that. But he came in hot and heavy. He said, now you aren't with the Department of Corrections anymore, are you? And after your July 1st testimony, you weren't allowed back into the Westville facility. Isn't that true? And you're working at another facility because they won't let you back in at Westville. She does, however, continue to work for the same group, which is not Westville itself. She worked for a group that more or less licenses out as independent contractors, so kind of like a temp agency, but for longer term. And so she still works for that company, but she doesn't go back into the prison facility anymore. They said, and here's why. You were following the Delphi murders case well before you treated Alan. Podcasts, Facebook, social media, you were doing this routinely. And there was significant activity in this case that did not involve, you were doing significant activity in this case. And that was before you knew anything about this case and continued after she began treating Richard Allen. You decided you were going to access objection and everything came to a stop. We know from this summer in the hearings that what was going to be asked was, you apparently, after talking to Richard Allen and he gave her some details about the crime, she went back and researched Elvis Fields. Kagan Klein. Elvis Fields figures later, but Kagan Klein. She was researching Kagan Klein, who was at that time also an inmate, who was somebody who was suspected by some people in the Delphi murders case, in addition to whichever, Richard Allen. So she said the fact that she was going to access this using her prison credentials, and she wouldn't otherwise have had access to it. And clearly she wasn't entitled to search for something like that. And she wasn't entitled to look for that. And she was researching Richard Allen's case while she's talking to him. And she was looking at podcasts and following and even commenting on social media about the case while she is specifically treating Richard Allen. Huge problem. And they asked her, that was in violation, but that was objected to. Let me go back to that. She would have said, if she had answered, that what she did was access the Kagan Klein files. That may be the very point that got her dismissed, or where they said she could not come back to Westville. But there was the objection from the state. And the reason for that, I would guess it was up at sidebar, is because the judge has said none of this third evidence comes in. Kagan Klein being a possible other suspect, that would have opened the door perhaps to something about him coming into trial, about the fact that he had been a suspect, about the fact that he is currently serving 43 years allegedly for various child sexual inappropriate photographs and other things like that. Using my words carefully. All right. So he did get out of her, though. It was in violation of Department of Corrections policy for you to do what you did. And she said, probably to that. He said, you followed several podcasts, gave shout outs and actually contributing. And you actually contributed to social media. And then you recommended some, saying, this one's really good, this particular podcast. So this was a violation. And she said, it's a gray area, which I have a feeling it is not at all. But at some point, information on the internet came out that this was Monica Walla who actually was treating Richard Allen. And then at that point, she shut her accounts down, but it all came out this summer at the hearing. And it was the day after the hearing. Apparently, she never went back to Westville. I heard somebody describe what happened at the hearing today, having not been present, but they said that she started out as a semi-defense witness, which is what, in my mind, I thought she was a defense witness, to say, I really felt like he had some real problems. He's not just making this up. He really had issues. But instead, after an hour or so of that, it became about her work on her looking at true crime, her conflict of interest between treating Richard Allen and researching true crime and following this case, that she had even gone, depending on whether you asked Dr. Walla or Rosie, she had maybe gone out of her way to see the Monon High Bridge and the place where this crime occurred. So she was asked, you never told your employer, you never disclosed to your employer when you were treating Richard Allen that you had an interest in his case. She disagreed with that. And so he pulled out her deposition. And this is what she said. No, I did not report following this case to my employer. And she said, well, I meant I didn't make a formal report, but I did tell my superiors, is what she said today. I had my recollection refreshed more recently. And now, quote, I'm looking at it in a different way. Rosie asked her, well, if you had a chance to do this all over again, would you stop following? Would you stop doing that when you started treating Richard Allen? And she said, probably. And she was communicating with Allen while she was following various social media accounts about his case. She acknowledged that. So on flipping back to November 22nd, that he had major depressive disorder from the time he hit the door of the Department of Corrections. It wasn't like this all developed anew afterwards. He said he had struggled with that for many years. And she believed he already had that at the time he hit the door of the prison. She also said she felt like he had dependent personality syndrome, which would involve difficulty separating from his wife. There were a bunch of questions through here that were objected to by the state that I think the defense was felt were unfair. They were questions that were leading, which you are allowed to do on cross, and that the judge, for example, the next question was, he was fragile. And there was an objection that was sustained to that. And it was hard to understand what about that. It seemed to be that the state was objecting that she needed to just answer whether he was use her own words without the words being placed in her mouth by Rosie. But it is cross-examination. So there were, again today, numerous objections that were almost all ruled on favorably for the state and against the defense. Said, you've been to a cell, you would agree circumstances were generally unchanged for 13 months. This is huge because she agreed with that. And that he was only out for rec and for his psychological visits when he would see her. And that was only once a month from what she said. Now, she saw him more than that, but I understood her to say he only got to come out for these visits once a month. And in now, another issue, the lights were on in his cell at all times, 24 hours a day. Another thing that's disorienting. And she, in her deposition, she stated today, well, he could dim them if he wanted to. But in her deposition, she said he couldn't do that. He could not dim it. And that a camera was on him 24 hours a day. That he never requested she never requested to watch any of the videos for the entire 13 months that he was in his room. All right. So continuing on, and back in November, this is after lunch, major depressive disorder was on the intake document, and he described symptoms consistent with that. So in other words, he actually was in a major depressive disorder at the time, which is not hard to imagine given his, the fact that he had just been charged with these crimes and arrested. Regardless of whether he did it, it's not hard to imagine that he would be in major depression at the time. His being at Westville was very unusual. She acknowledged that. Rosie was doing some really long speaking objections. It was funny, and so did the prosecution at one point. He went into this long speaking objection about, well, the reason that we're asking about why he was in safekeeping is because he was being treated differently and there was more impact on him because, in fact, he had not been in prison before. He knew nothing about prison. It wasn't like he had time to get acclimated. Instead, he was just thrown straight from regular world. Bam, you're in the most restrictive possible place anywhere in the entire prison system. And he didn't get orientation training. He went through a list. Well, there are a lot of rules, aren't there? There are a lot of rules around monetary system and how you do commissary, and he got nothing. He just got straight into your private cell. That's it. And you're there for over a year. And in fact, it was even more restrictive during the periods when he was on unaliving watch, because a lot of stuff had to be taken out of the cells. So there was I told you about the 3x3 grate. Her demeanor was really interesting on the stand because she would smile a lot and sort of ruefully. At one point, she leaned back and was like, she kind of like, And she was very emotive on the stand. She had a lot of reaction to things. She said that there were times when he was shackled while he was in therapy. In a deposition today, she was saying, no, they always took it off. But in her deposition, apparently, she said that even after he sat down in that 3x3 room, they left him shackled with the waist shackles and the belt on all through his therapy. So the video, they talked about the video of Richard Allen being transported to the court in a full jumpsuit with shackles. And she said she was asked a question, have you ever seen anyone transported to court like that before? I mean, most people are transported in their clothes, but there was an objection that it wasn't relevant and it was outside the scope of what had been asked for in direct. In other words, they didn't ask him about being transferred to jail, so the judge didn't allow it. But that was a really good point. If he was shackled and all, that would be different from how they were treating other prisoners. That's what they wanted to get in. He was worried about having to get in a dog cage for transport. Unaliving, let's see, history. One of the things he came in saying, they ask you, do you have a history of physical or SA in your past? And he reported, nope, I don't have any of that. Later, however, he claimed that had actually happened to him during his meltdown period, I'll call it. He also, when he first came in on the 7th, was stressed about what would happen when he got out of prison and how he would spend the rest of his life, which was very optimistic, if anything, because the concept of him getting out of prison is a long stretch. He is in prison for very, very serious crimes. So how he would spend the rest of his life, probably not the chief worry. Whether he gets out at all is really the chief worry. And then on the 10th of November, Richard Allen said that it was all a psychological game to wear him down. That fit really well with the interviews we saw yesterday morning, where the law enforcement just lost it on him, screaming, you did it. I know you did it. And just cussing a lot, a really lot. They played that, and it was Richard Allen made like one cuss word, and there was a lot. And the Jerry Holman said, I was just responding, but I'll tell you, Jerry went a long time and a lot more than Richard Allen did. So on the 21st, he said he felt as if he was being treated as if he already had been decided to be guilty, and he would never admit to something he didn't do and he said he didn't do it. On the 22nd, he said his trip to Delphi for a court proceeding was strained and scary, and he was sitting in a box. And he said it was good to know that the evidence didn't point to him. So he seemed at that point to be hopeful that it wouldn't be too serious. On the 27th, she said he presents as selfless and worried about his wife and her needs. That's a theme throughout his stay. He was constantly asking about his wife, talking about whether or not she was taken care of. He wanted to talk to his wife, and their connection seemed very deep, his connection to her. And she acknowledged, seemed very selfless about that, seemed to really care and be concerned about his wife. On the 6th of December, he said he was an innocent man and felt like he had already been convicted. Actually, I think there was an objection sustained to that question. But then on December 29th, he reported frustration because he couldn't get a regular toothbrush. He could not visit with his wife. He was sleeping on the floor. He had no TV or desk. He had no access to a tablet in his cell. So all of this is aimed at showing your big claims, prison, that you're giving him all this stuff are fake. He's in there sleeping on the floor. He's got no mattress. You didn't give him all this stuff you claim you did. He was very much in a state of deprivation. She also was asked, they're tearing the prison down, aren't they? And she said, she kind of shook her head and looked dubious. I didn't hear her say anything. But then he said, well, you live next door and surely you can see it being torn down. So there wasn't a clear answer to that. But I think by this time, it just already looked sort of like she was hiding some things from the jury, or like, I think that the credibility issue was certainly there. However, I don't think that applies to the confessions. So we'll get into that. We're almost finished with the confessions. Are we? Nope, not quite. We have a little bit further to go. All right, let me say thanks to a few people because we do have some more you don't want to miss. All right. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that very much. And Courtney. So right now, I don't think even if someone brought it up that the judge would let it in. That's my opinion. Even if someone opened the door and threw it out, for one thing, we've only about got the defense witnesses left. So they're not going to let the defense open the door itself. All right. Thank you, My Father's Alibi. That's a very generous gift. I certainly appreciate that. And ABC, please accept Lawyer No request to join his podcast. Sure, I would do that. I don't think I have a request from Lawyer though, but certainly I could reach out to him, or maybe he's reached out to me. I just haven't seen that yet. I am pretty far behind on emails. If you haven't gotten a response to me, you may not get a response in the next little bit, but I'll go look for that. Thank you for letting me know that, ABC. I appreciate that. I do think this case is so important. Now, I've tried very hard and am trying very hard to be as neutral as possible when I tell you about the case, but the issues around the treatment of Richard Allen, they matter. And it doesn't, whether he's guilty or innocent of this crime is not the same thing as whether or not we believe he's receiving a fair trial. Both of those things are important. Finding out who did it, convicting that person, including if it's Richard Allen, and giving Richard Allen a fair trial, all of that is important. So I am very happy to spread this further because I think this case needs eyeballs and attention. Modema Rose, thank you very much. I don't have Modema Rose up. All right, I'm going to stop right there and then take a head back into more on the confessions and the utter mental breakdown of Richard Allen because it was profound. There's just no question. And we are back at the okay, we're back in April. I'll tell you, it's crazy. When I put all this together, I think it'll be a lot clearer. But for now, there's just no way to do that 2 hours after the court ends. I got to come on and just tell you this as fast as possible. I want you to know as the case goes on what the most important facts are. So talked about throwing belongings away. He was talking about self-harm and doing crazy things that were of grave concern. But again, they always felt like, maybe he's just faking it. He's trying to get something. On the 20th, his cognitive issues had worsened. On the 11th of May, he was preoccupied and paranoid. On the 18th of May, he received his second involuntary injection of Haldol, and it's supposed to last for 30 days. However, he received another one. I'll put one more entry. That's the 18th, the second injection. The 26th, he has 2 black eyes because he gave them to himself. He's harming himself. Then on the 5th, so this is not a full 30 days, not even close after May 18th, but he received another involuntary injection of Haldol due to self-harm. He was headbanging this time. Now, why were they giving? Was that too much? Was he over medicated? She said it was different because you can receive an extra dose if it's emergent, if there's a real need to do that really quickly. So on the 26th of July, he had bulging eyes. That's really creepy. I didn't know drugs could do that, but she reported it. And then on the 16th, he had a change in his physical characteristics and the eyes were no longer bulging. The 8th of November, they did point out, see, we're back on the 8th of November. 5'5". He was 5'5". So that was exactly what Baldwin told us. Remember how he was on his fishing license? He was 5'4", and then he was 5'6", and Baldwin said 5'5". So he split the difference, and so did the prison. The references to Allen meeting with his attorneys and receiving discovery and his behavior changed. Rosie said to her, well, you never actually saw this discovery, did you? You don't really know what he was looking at. And she said, no, she had never seen it. She didn't know what it was about. And then they got into the destruction of her notes. The way she was doing her notes, when she would stand at the door talking to Allen, or when she would sit across that chain link between the two of them while he was in the 3x3 cell, she would be taking notes, handwritten notes, writing down what he was saying. Apparently, she should be keeping those. That would be protocol according to the American Psychological Association. She should keep those handwritten notes. Instead, she was taking the notes, typing them in at her computer, and then destroying the notes. She shouldn't have been doing that. And so they went through the fact that it would have been best practices. And in her deposition, she had acknowledged that it would have been best practices for her to have kept those handwritten notes. He had significant mental illness plus functional impairment, so he did fit the Department of Corrections requirement from the beginning. So in other words, throughout this, he should have been treated as fitting in the sort of volatile category of somebody who was cognitively, had a significant mental illness. He should be receiving those treatments that would be protective of him for that. He was not supposed to be more than 30 days in solitary. And that policy exists because of the recognition that long-term solitary confinement can be detrimental to mental health. Is that not obvious? I mean, that is so clearly obvious. He had psychotic processes in March and April. And well, that was what Rosie said. They started back in March, right? And she said, well, I think it was April. And he said, well, at your deposition, you said March. Do you want to refresh your recollection? She's like, no, I'm good. So at her deposition, she said that went all the way back till March. She still stood firm, though, on he could be feigning or faking, although in May of this year, she said she was now questioning whether it was really feigning and faking or whether this was all very real in a true mental breakdown. Okay, let's get back to that question of whether or not, because they did in this order, whether or not she had disclosed her true crime interest and her interest in this case before she treated Richard Allen. And she said she had disclosed her interest in true crime generally, and even her interest in this case, that, quote, they were aware that she was a fan of true crime and that she didn't handle Richard Allen any differently. But you can see the issue immediately. Her to be interested in his case and constantly, who did it, and trying to treat him for severe mental illness when he's confessing to her, there is no way to reconcile all that. There are so many conflicts in there, whether in the comments that she's going to make that could be even just flavored a little bit by what she's hearing from Richard Allen, or in terms of when she's talking to him and she's heard things. She even said she talked to him specifically about things people were saying about his case online. She told him, you have supporters. You have people out there who don't think you're guilty or who believe you're not being treated fairly. She said she did it to encourage him to, quote, maintain hope. But at the same time, that was crossing a line where she was pulling that into his mental health and into the way he was being treated there in the prison. And he asked her, but it was directly related to this case, and you were doing it for personal reasons. It was directly related. She was searching this case, not just true crime, this case. What happened in this case? What happened to Libby? What happened to Abby? What about Kagan Pline? Could he be the guy? She's researching that for personal reasons. And there's always, she did say, well, I mean, there's always that interest. So, and she just shrugged. He pointed out, Rosie did, that there is a way to objectively test whether someone is feigning, faking, pretending that they're mentally ill when they're really not. But he was never given any of that testing. So all that's left is everyone from the prison says, yeah, we think he was faking. and everyone not in the prison says, on defense side, says no. He did point out a good point. She destroyed her note saying, well, I was trying to maintain privacy for the people I was treating. And he said, what kind of privacy is there when there's a video on the entire time? Tons of juror questions, as you might expect. They were pretty much about what you would expect, but there were some that were fairly technical, but most of them had to do with, I'll read you a couple. Was it expected or normal for a brief psychotic episode to recur? Is that something that regularly happens? And she said, yeah, it can happen again and again. That would be, I would guess, the juror thinking, okay, well, in April, he was a little crazy. And then in May, he confesses again. Could he be having recurring psychosis? Is that a thing? And she said, yep, that's a thing. So those were the kinds of things they were asking. All right, let's take a little break. And I want to talk for just a minute about the confessions. One of the things I'd said yesterday was it was really important to have that juxtaposition where in the morning we had the interviews and we saw one Richard Allen. And then in the afternoon, we listened to the guards and we saw a completely different person. And that was magnified today through the testimony of Dr. Walla. Completely different. He was in his interview, he felt very equal to people. He was just talking normally. He seemed very confident, very calm. And then we've got this unhinged behavior where he's eating feces. He's rolling around naked. He's just doing stuff that makes no sense. He's stuffing a Bible down his toilet. And all of these things don't make sense. That same person went from the interview person, I didn't do it. I'm not going to confess. You can't make me. I'm just not going to confess. Take me to prison if you have to, but I'm not going to tell you I killed 2 little girls because I didn't. That's one guy. And then you've got the guy in prison after months of solitary confinement, rolling around on the floor naked, eating feces and saying, I did it, I did it. These are 2 really different people. Can they be reconciled? Sure, they can be, but they are really different looking in the moment. And we saw this all in 2 days. And I think this is the most important 2 days. The way the jury feels about these 2 days will be how it decides the case. This is it. This is the moment in time when it will make the decision. I'm not saying other things don't matter. Of course they do. And there had to be proof of a lot of things like the bullet to bring the focus onto Richard Allen in the first place. But what will happen here is going to be, I think, heavily dependent on what exactly they believe about whether the confessions were real, and particularly that one about the van. So we had one other filler witness, and then we moved to the witness about the van. And that was so important. So Steve Mullen was next. They brought him up again. This is, I think, maybe his 4th time, maybe 3rd time. He did this is something so smart, I think the prosecution did. One of the jurors had a question after the Hoosier Harvest Store video where they had still shots showing what they believe, prosecution believes, is Richard Allen's car passing the Hoosier Harvest Store. The prosecution says, yes, that's Richard Allen arriving at the scene where the girls are about to be abducted and then murdered, and that it fits the time frame where we believe he was there and at the park at that exact time. So a juror asks a question, okay, you think that's his black Ford Focus, but did you look to see whether there are other 2016 black Ford Focuses in the area? And apparently they went back and did that. And that was so smart for a host of reasons, because we're being responsive to you, jurors. We really want you to know, we want to answer your questions. I thought that was just so wise of them to do. So the answer, they eliminated black Ford they focused down on a few counties, double entries they took out, titanium, they limited it down to the exact model, and there were 8, and then there was only 1 registered in Carroll County. So the defense got in some good questions, like the fact that it was in Carroll County doesn't necessarily mean anything, because you can drive in from other counties, and lots of people do, to go to the trails specifically. I met people from all over when I was at the trails this weekend from other counties around. And There, you can't see the license plate on the vehicle, the model, so they don't really know exactly what model it is. There was a whole host of Ford Focuses from 2011 to 2016 that look pretty much exactly the same. So they didn't look at those either. If they had, there would have been a lot more that they would have put into their pool. So, then there was a juror question about this as well. Did you check as to whether those rims, those very all-important see-through wheels and rims, were specific to his model, his make, or were they specific? Did they cross like a host of years from that particular model? So at that point, we moved to the final witness and the big finale of the day. It was quite dramatic too. Let me say thanks to a few more people, but you can hang on just one more minute. All right. Well, this is a question. I'll save it. I'm going to save that. So let's get into the final witness of the day, Brad Weber. Brad Weber was at one point a potential suspect. In fact, they got his Sig Sauer, the only other Sig Sauer they got other than Richard Allen's. They didn't rule out his gun as a match to that cartridge they found between the feet of Libby and Abby. But on the other hand, they said, yeah, we can't rule it out, but maybe. It's inconclusive. But with Richard Allen, they said it's a match. This is a clear match. So in Brad Weber, they said, the prosecution says, don't lean into the microphone, sit back and speak up. Why not do both? Why is this something we have to tell witnesses don't do? Whatever you do, don't speak into the microphone because the people you're watching might hear you. We would never want that. So I don't understand why the prosecution and the judge consistently tell witnesses not to speak into the microphone, to lean back. The judge had the witness move it away from her after she moved it toward her. I don't get it. Why? But he has his residence at the end of a private drive. His road, the driveway, it starts as a road and then ultimately becomes his driveway. I filmed a video of trying to go there, but they have signs and they have it blocked off. So you can watch that video. It took about 6 minutes. And what I'm doing is just taking you on a series around here so you can kind of see what it looks like and what's it like to go to the bridge. What can you see? And I really enjoy going and seeing these places. I thought you might as well. So be sure to watch that. I posted it just this morning. So he said the way it works is the Monon High Bridge is a very long trestle. It goes all the way from across a 60-foot deep trench where the creek is, but it has to go back a ways on either side because it's not cliffs on either side of this stream. It's got to go back to hit flat land. When it does, there's still a steep drop off down to a road, which is Brad Weber's private driveway. And so Brad Weber drove at that time, very importantly, a van, a Ford Econo van. Remember what Richard Allen said in that all-important confession. He said that a van interrupted him. He was going to Are the Girls? Grape would be a rhyme. And he was going to do that, but he got interrupted. And then he got scared and thought, I got to kill them. And then he did. That was sort of the thinking that went on. So he went through what his shift was that day. He worked from 6 to 2:30. He clocked in at work. They had the document right there all the way back from 2017. He clocked in at 5:41 a.m. for a 6 a.m. shift. He clocked out at 2:02 p.m. And he said it's about 20 to 25 minutes home. Now, it sounded like there might have been some good cross-examination on this, but they never really got into it. They may bring him back and get into it, but there was an objection that what they were asking was outside the scope. What the defense was asking was, they started with, now, you were out of town the week before the 13th. I'll tell you what I think they were going to ask. Said, you didn't drive straight home. And you left, sure, you left work at 2:02, but you didn't drive straight home at 2:30. You instead went to work on your ATM machines, I guess suggesting he maintains or owns ATM machines, and that you told law enforcement that's what you did. You went to maintain your machines. He said, no, I dropped off a trailer. And Baldwin said, yeah, you did that earlier in the day. And then Baldwin asked, "You went to work on your ATM machines?" He yelled, "No." And then there was an objection, and there was never any more answer to that. I think what they were suggesting is that he was doing something on the way home, that he told law enforcement what he was doing was checking his ATM machines. If he got home right about 2:30 or 2:35, that would maybe fit pretty well with the time frame that the state wants, because Libby's video of the man right behind Abby, that's at 2:13. So that would be about roughly maybe 20 minutes after that they were maybe interrupted by a van, and then all the rest occurs where they walk. I guess they haven't walked across the creek by that point. They walk across the creek, go up, and then they end in the clearing, and he kills the girls. But there wasn't really a final cross. They may bring him back, I don't know, but it never really came out. I think they wanted to say he had something else he did. He told law enforcement he did. So even though, yeah, that'd be a van, and that would be a telling point if Richard Allen knew that there was a van coming through right at that time and said, remember, because it interrupted him. It even fit into his explanation for what happened that day. But they're saying, no, that's really not possible, because of the fact that you were out working somewhere else, but they never got that in. It never really came in. He just denied it. He said, no, I wasn't working on ATM machines. And there was never that piece of evidence to contradict it. All told, it was a very some very important day for the prosecution. I think they have completely changed, flipped the narrative. I don't think that it's out of the question, but that van remains right now a really important issue. If the defense can't knock it out in their case, I think that's going to be a significant problem for the jurors. I think they're going to look at that and say, how do you know about the van? Because it looks like there was a van right now. It looks like a van went through right at that time, and that would make sense. How would he have known that unless Richard Allen was right there, unless he was actually attempting to attack the girls just as he said he was? So I think it was super important. We are going to let me go through super chats, and then I'll take a couple of questions. We're going to go short on questions tonight, I think. All right, where am I? I don't know where I was. I know, I was with Irish Alexandria. How do you fancy his options for appeal if he's found guilty? Asks Irish Alexandria. And well, welcome from Ireland. Glad to have you. As far as how I fancy his options for appeal, that's really hard to answer. I pulled up the statutes today from Indiana to take a look, and I think that deserves like a whole discussion. And so we'll do that. We'll do a whole discussion. But at this stage, I would say this. I think that he has, that excluding all of that third-party culprit evidence, I think that was seriously problematic and should not have happened. I think he needs to be able to present that, and he can't receive a fair trial without that. However, that is not the way appeals necessarily work. And so appeals work on an issue, a standard called harmless error. The question is whether or not the error that was made was harmless in light of everything else taken into account. I believe that it's way better chance of getting reversed on appeal than other cases. Be way better. But you have to remember, only about, I think, 25% get reversed, somewhere in there. So it's 75% chance you're not going to get reversed to start with. And then in this particular case, if this confession holds up, I think that's a problem. Then there's a question is, well, if he's admitted it and used some secret fact, then is that going to be enough to make the failure to let him put the other evidence in harmless error? I still feel very strongly that he needs to have been given the right to present this. I think it's absolutely inappropriate that all of that was kept out. I don't think he can have a fair trial without that. So I say his chances are decent, but you never get huge chances on appeal. So that's just the truth. And, I clerked for an appellate judge, so I know about kind of the thinking, and they very much defer to the trial judge. They very much believe that the trial judges were there. They saw the witnesses, they made the decisions, and you shouldn't, you shouldn't second guess them on every matter. If it's critically important, you do, but it's a rare thing. Okay, we got new members, Opaline and Vicky and Shelly. Hey, Shelly, and thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Opal says it has me worried that a fair trial is not taking place in Delphi, and how important that my coverage has been. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm concerned about it too. That's honestly why I came. I looked at that like, what do you mean all the evidence is out? How can all the evidence be out? How can all the geofencing evidence be out? How is that possible? And I thought that just doesn't seem fair to me. I want to watch this trial. I want to see what's happening. And clearly, I think the rulings have gone over and over again in favor of the prosecution. I think the confession we heard today was extremely significant. Although the impeachment of Monica Walla was enormous, just enormous. It was so well done, really good cross-examination. I don't think it cuts all of those confessions out, because it may impeach her, but a lot of those similar confessions came from many different people. All of those guards who testified yesterday, the warden, person after person said, yeah, he said about this same thing. She is the only one who has the van, but that's so specific, and it just seems like an odd thing for her to note. Could she herself have known that because of her involvement? Yeah, that's entirely possible. But this is very, very serious for the defense. So it's a significant thing to overcome. But I too am very worried about the fairness of the trial. This matters a lot, and a lot of eyes are on it. And I think that's a good thing. And it's hard to have eyes on this. It's not broadcast. It's difficult to get in. It's difficult because you can't have your phone all day. You stand in line, not just once, but more than once during the day. And it's during that period of time, it's literally, and now we can at least have food, not in the courtroom. So while standing in line on the first floor to get back in after lunch, you eat something that's in your bag, take some water, and you eat in the lobby on the first floor, and then you go back up to the room. But you can't go out for lunch. It's just a very different kind of environment. There are no cell phones. There's no electronics. All your notes are by hand. This is very, very different. This is not a normal trial. And so coverage is hard. And I knew that. And I thought, I could cover this, and I think somebody really needs to. And I think it's important that we as a country, as a nation, we as a community pay attention to this and make sure that it is fair, because there's a lot going on here and it is a concern. And Cheryl, can you remind us about the FBI? Were they not interested in helping, or not invited or allowed to help? So they were helping. They initially were involved in all of this, and they, in fact, are the ones who filled out that affidavit about Ron Logan. So they were heavily involved, and they had opinions and were moving forward. And then we've got hints from Rosie that there was a turf war that erupted between the Indiana State Police and the FBI. And the bottom line was the Indiana State Police won, and they were kicked out. So there you have it. Kay Oakley, thank you so much for that. Deborah, I appreciate that as well. Mama Pinks is saying we need a total amount of pages for the notes today. Oh, there's bets out there. Oh, there are bets. Okay. All right. It was 36. All right. So tell me who was closest. Who wins the pool? That's what I want to know. 36 pages for today. All right. Bethany, a member for a month. What is the consensus with all the other law tubers there? Are y'all thinking along the same line? So I think that you have to divide that down in a couple of ways. First of all, by who's actually present, because that's sort of a self-selected group, right? That's people who are here, and they're obviously concerned enough about the case to be doing something about coming. It's, it's trouble to come. And hey, maybe your technology won't work. I personally have experienced that. So I think you've got people who are concerned about it to start with. And then I think people have a bench. We have people who, I mean, you look at some of the people who are here are kind of pro-prosecution. Some of them are pro-defense. And so I think they kind of go with whatever their lean is. I think that's just a natural thing to do when they
when they report on stuff, that's how they see it, and that's what they think. So I don't think that there's a consensus. I do think everyone here at least has at least some concern about the fair trial issue. Maybe not the ones who are kind of more on the prosecution side, but I think the majority of people here are very concerned about that and feel like this is worth eyeballs being on because it matters to all of us. All right, lawyer, mention me. Well, that sounds fun. I would love to be on his show. I enjoy what he does very much. I said that his audience requested me. Well, that's y'all. Thank you. I appreciate that. Would love to see a collab. Me too. That'd be a lot of fun. All right. RA Defense made a new attempt to bring in Odinism. Yes, there is a new brief that's been filed. I haven't read it yet, but I did. They sent it to me from the court, so I know that it's out there, and they're trying once again, and they should. Odinism and the third-party culprits, that was very much part of what the defense is, and it should be permitted. In my opinion, I don't understand why it would not. I think it absolutely should be. It's part and parcel of his fair trial. Sean, I've heard that, and I personally didn't see that, but I mean, I can see some similarities, but I thought there were some differences too. But it did definitely look posed to me. I'll go that far. The exact way the way it was done, I'm not as sure about that. Sean saying, oh, that was Sean. This is Christy. Thank you for the super sticker. And C.A. Beverforden, thank you so much. Here's just a friend asking me, do you wonder if he intentionally feigned psychosis to delegitimize his own confessions? Why else would he say he unalived people who are still alive? You know, I honestly don't think that. I don't think and one of the reasons I don't is I saw those interviews. They're not public, so the world hasn't seen them yet. It probably will come out in the next few months. You'll be able to watch them then. But he was so adamant that he didn't do it, and he was just so confident and normal and so different from the person described by the guards, described by Monica Walla. It just didn't sound the same at all. So I don't think he just was delegitimizing his confessions. For one thing, that means he confessed and then tried to delegitimize it, I guess, afterwards, while still confessing, which seems kind of crazy. And I'll say this, the prison officials can say all they want that this is feigned and they don't believe it, but they gave him Haldol against his will. And I don't think a doctor does that unless a doctor feels strongly that the person needs it, that they are real. And one of the things she said today, Dr. Monica Walla, not the one who prescribed the medication, by the way, but she's a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. And she said that it didn't matter by that point whether or not he was feigning it because he had decomposed so much. To me, that meant by the time you give medicine, they're in bad shape. That means specifically you think there is a problem, and enough of a problem that it's not just fake. It's not just feigned. I think those are different. You don't give Haldol against somebody's will to somebody you don't think is even ill. They're just pretending. That would be very inappropriate to give that. And not only to give it, but to give extra doses because of the way the person was acting. So that would really be wildly inappropriate. All right, let's see. Pretty Pearls. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Pretty Pearls has helped us out too. Thank you for that. Christy Painter's daughter. Glad you're liking it. How is the bullet evidence? Long Island Hillbilly is asking. Well, the way it came in, or the way the evidence worked out, was they found this unspent cartridge between the feet of Libby and Abby. They found it kind of by happenstance because they were shining a light around looking for blood pools. When they discovered, sure enough, there was that cartridge buried in the ground between the feet. And they pulled that out. We don't have pictures of that. We don't have pictures of it in the lab, but that cartridge, they say, matches exactly to Richard Allen's gun. So far, the only direction we have the evidence is the prosecution. We do know that the defense vehemently objects to the concept that you can match a bullet to a gun. They think that's junk science. They had an expert who would have said that, but the judge kept that expert out, saying that expert is not truly able to testify in that area. This person's a metallurgist. This person is not somebody who knows about whether or not you can match a gun and a bullet. And so she kept out that testimony, saying that if he were testifying on metallurgy, that might be a different matter. They also are going to argue that bullet doesn't even match. Even if you believe that you can match a bullet to a gun, this bullet doesn't match that gun. So they'll have that expert in, but they won't have the expert who would have said it was junk science. I thought they got in some good cross-examination on that, though. Would it have been better for them to have their own expert? Yes, 100%. But they do at least have somebody to contradict that in general. Dodd's discussion. Could the gunshot have fallen through the bridge and ended up right where Abby was? So it may, oh, no, because those are on totally different sides, and one was a lot further down than the other. It's not directly under the bridge. That isn't where the bodies were found. So the bodies were found, I don't know how far it would be if you walked, maybe quarter mile or half a mile, maybe. Probably just a quarter mile. You would have to walk through the woods, and you have to cross the stream, then you have to walk uphill, and then you have to get to the clearing. I haven't done it yet, but that's sort of the sequence you have to do. You have to actually cross the stream to get there, or come down from the cemetery, but they have that gated off. So I don't think that it could be. Now, the gunshot, he mentioned today in that confession, he mentioned doing something on the gun, and he thought that's when the bullet must have gotten lost. And that's how the bullet that law enforcement found, it's not the bullet that law enforcement found. They found one at the scene. But as far as but he did think something had happened at the bridge. So maybe he actually cocked the gun and the casing came out and he didn't stop to look for it. Something like that. Thank you, Sassy Me. I appreciate that very much. And Meyer, there has been much intentional chaos. This has been a whole week of intentional chaos. And then there's chaos not even intentional, such as the live stream getting thrown in. Woman of Steel, thank you. I appreciate that. And Jebby, thank you. And Jebby, by the way, has been a member for 3 months. He left no trace evidence anywhere. That's the truth. For somebody who wasn't planning on this, that's what it sounds like. He just showed up. I mean, according to these confessions, he just shows up at the park. It's like, hey, there are 2 girls. Think I'm going to do something. He kidnaps them, abducts them, does all this, murders them. And he does all of that, leaving absolutely no trace evidence and with no planning in advance. That's, wow. I don't know. It seems nutty. Thank you, Mama T. I appreciate that so much. So Andrea Zander, him knowing details only the murderer may know after he got his discovery is not much of a bombshell. And that is true, except for the van. They have one person on their team, a paralegal, who is listed as someone who will testify. And the paralegal is also cleared. They got to name somebody on each side who could stay in the courtroom even though they were going to testify. I'm guessing maybe this is a person who's going to come in and say, here's what we showed. And this is what he had. And whether or not he had the van, really, really important. That's a detail. If he knew that the van came through at that time, maybe he could have made up that whole confession in almost a fever dream, because he was sleep deprived and clearly losing all mental stability. You can see all of that. So if they can prove that he knew about the bullet, that's their only shot at getting this eliminated, in my opinion. And they may be able to. They may be able to show that was in the packet of materials he received. They definitely can show, well, I would imagine, that he had photographs of the scene, that he knew they were abducted at the bridge, and that he knew a lot of details. Every other detail, I think, could be explained. The only one I don't know about is the van. And that may be there. I just don't know. All right. So answer to this question that Opaline has any video been presented in court for his prison interviews? I'm going to take my glasses off so I can read this. Confessions, I'm not sure how strong the evidence is on that. So it's, we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen any video of it. So far, we've heard from the guards, we've heard from Dr. Monica Walla, and we've heard from the warden talking about it. And the jury has seen some written notations that they made at the time. I believe that the defense team is going to show us actual video from his cell. So we're going to see what it looked like. We may see him confess. We may be able to judge for ourselves whether or not he's really all there or whether he is completely mentally not there. And that's going to be really important. All right, Gretchen Nara. Thank you. Yeah, it's a fascinating case and a really important one. The chat was on fire tonight, Dolly tells me. Marlon and Mama Pinks worked overtime. Thank you to Marlon and Mama Pinks. I tell you what, they are worth their weight in gold, the both of them. And Catherine, who's been a member for 5 months, I'm glad for that, is outraged and grateful that I'm in court. Me too. Tom Webster, good friend from the trial. Hey, Tom. Tom has a channel as well and has been covering this for a long time. Knows a lot about the case. Also a great note taker and just a nice person. So thank you very much for your super chat, and a shout out to Tom and his channel. Cheryl Locke. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoy watching the report on the case. All right. Well, I don't know how much I'll have to cut out in the middle. I have to wait until it processes. And I think, did I even ask for questions? I don't think I did. So that's good. Oh, well, people have put them in anyway. Okay, maybe I did ask. GSP 0804, had they ruled out Richard Allen's wife? They said there was female DNA at the crime scene. I don't know. She's listed on the witness list for both sides. They apparently don't plan to call her for the state. They might call her in connection to the confessions because some of them were made to her on the phone. We're going to hear those tomorrow, I think. The witness will talk about what was actually happening. He'll talk about, I think, play probably the audio tape of the conversations where Richard Allen confessed to his wife and to his mother. So we will be hearing more about that soon. And as far as whether or not they tested his wife, I don't know the answer to that. I don't really think that anyone is suggesting that she had any involvement in this at all. I don't think there's any suggestion of that. No one thinks that. I don't believe. I don't think law enforcement has even remotely considered it. Anna, as a therapist, over a year in solitary, trust me, best trained ops break. Yeah, Anna, it seems crazy that somebody would be in prison and in solitary confinement for that long. And when you think about it, I mean, given how many times they were taking him out of his cell and sometimes he didn't even get to go, you're looking at 3 hours a week for a year at the most. And that's, wow. I mean, that's just crazy. That same cell, no interaction with anybody, sometimes not having a tablet or anything, that would definitely break anybody. One of the things that makes this case important is not just the verdict and whether or not the jury convicts Richard Allen, but whether or not the state of Indiana and particularly the Department of Corrections take seriously what the allegations are here, because they are horrendous. That is totally unacceptable. Someone in solitary confinement for more than a year, no, can never happen, should never happen. That's absolutely asking for breaking somebody, just like you say, Anna. And so that is one of the things that I was kind of heartened to see, was that yesterday in the back of the courtroom were some lawyers from the Attorney General's office and from some other organizations. Department of Corrections, I think, had someone there. And so my hope was they were watching the testimony by the guards and the warden former warden talking about the things that had happened in the confessions. But and I didn't see them there today, so I don't know if they were still there or if they were not involved. This was Dr. Monica Walla, who also used to work with the prison system. So I think they really ought to be sitting up, paying attention, noticing this. It's super important. Penelope, can anyone, his sister or other victims, testify? Yes, they certainly can testify as to whether they were SA'd, Penelope, and they may. I don't know if the defense wants to give that any more credence. They probably do want to point out several things that were false, but I don't know which ones, but that might be some of them. So question, so you think Richard Allen was walking the bridge to look at fish and check his stats and wearing clothing similar to that of bridge guy? Well, his clothing, I've always thought the clothing was a little generic, the jeans and a blue jacket or black jacket. But as far as walking the bridge to look at fish, is what he said, check his stocks. I don't know. He certainly, I went out there. One of the questions I had was, and you'll see this in the video that I'm going to drop for tomorrow morning, just the walk with me video, because I went to the bridge and I want to show you. Well, I had this question. He's 60 feet up. I mean, what fish are you going to see, right? And that's what I was thinking. I thought the prosecution had kind of hinted at that. But actually, I discovered when you walk out on the bridge, sure enough, you can see it's completely clear and you can see right down in there. So, okay, well, at least it's not something you just dismiss as nonsense. But as far as, I guess basically you're asking me, do I believe him or not? And I try not to say that until we finish. So I won't answer my opinion on it, but that is what he argued he was doing when he talked to police in the interviews. Thank you, Helen. I appreciate that so much. I'm grateful. It's been quite a volatile evening. So I'm very appreciative that y'all are here and still being kind. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Tetra wanting to know, could the bullet have been planted? That was a suggestion when I think and there were rumors that, this bullet had been planted. But I think the thought behind that was it was discovered days later. People went back to the scene and were like, oh, look, a bullet no one saw before. But that is not the case, because there were pictures that night of the bullet between the bodies. There were pictures of the bodies with the bullet, and you could see it all there. And so there was no planting of it days later. It would have had to have been somebody planting it right away. Unless they switched the bullets, it'd have to be some pretty major conspiracy for that to happen. All right, let's see. Tokavid says, any more come out about the emails? Not sure which emails you mean, Tokavid, so maybe you could put a little bit more in there. I'm not sure how to answer that one. I'm looking for question marks at the beginning, in case you wondered. That's the only way I can spot everybody. I'll just do a question or two more. Rochelle talking about somebody who was suspected, but the computer showed they were on the computer during the crime. And I think you're talking about Kagan Klein, and there was, from law enforcement, they believed that they had activity on the computers by Kagan Klein and his father at their home, and they didn't think they were connected. The times I saw didn't look like they were an exact match, but I don't have the evidence from that particular case, so I can't truly speak to that. All right. Just saying that computers can be manipulated. Not by me, that's for sure. But yes, by people who know what they are doing. They probably can be manipulated. Okay, Angel, how frustrating that you can't watch everyone because you're expecting to note every word. Isn't that the truth? Because there's not even the audio recording. It is really frustrating not to be able to do this. And no, you absolutely, I can't watch, read lips and write. And I mean, it's too much. And sometimes you're like, gosh, I'd really like to see what the jury is, how they're reacting to this, but I'm still trying to get down the words that everybody said. So you just have to pick your things. Some people focus more on the jury and they take fewer notes. For me, the words that people say, that's so important. I think it's a lawyer thing. We really like words and what people testify to. It's, I guess, our trade. Leslie, is it possible for other judges to be made aware of these judicial shenanigans and somehow step in or something? So there have been attempts to go to the Supreme Court to get various things changed by the media, by repeatedly the defense. So I don't think anything's going to change. I don't think anything is going to happen in this case. What I do hope will happen is people will look at this and say, let's come up with some rules that we believe in, that we think we can enforce, that we believe people can use on a regular basis. They already have some rules and things around broadcasting in courtrooms, but it obviously needs to be firmed up. There's a lot more than just broadcasting that goes into this. There's getting people in. There's providing overflow room. There's providing for media. There's who qualifies as media. There's so many things that go into making this work as a trial and making it easy. And it's not. Right now, it's really, really not. So I think I have one more person over here. Just a friend asking about RA's voice sounding like Bridge Guy. So I talked to many people about what they thought. Some people, 100%, that is absolutely Bridge Guy. Me, no, I don't think so, but I can't really tell. I felt like the voice we heard from Bridge Guy was so altered and mechanized because they were trying to enhance it. I didn't feel like it was all that recognizable. So that's the reason I think that I can't connect them. I just honestly would have to say, I don't know. I just can't say, yes, they connect. But there were people who felt really strongly. I think, well, I won't say that because I'm not sure what he thought. I'll let him speak for himself. Okay. So, all right. Well, we will call it an evening. Thank you all for watching. We will work on the technology for tomorrow, and I will look forward to seeing everybody at 7, well, as close to 7 p.m. as we can get. Oh, we have big news. I totally forgot this. Inside Edition is going to be here filming as I talk to you on Friday. So they're going to be right here in the hotel room with me. They are going to be looking at your questions, and I'll be answering your questions. So I thought we could go ahead and come up with a plan. And here was what I thought our plan should be. You should all be thinking of really easy questions that you would like to ask me. Hey, Lee, how do you spell Delphi? Or, name any 2 witnesses you thought were important in the case. So be working on your super easy questions, and those can be the ones that I answer. And they're going to use this for an Inside Edition show that they're going to be putting on Hulu. So anyway, that's really exciting. So we're going to be on Inside Edition together. So I will see y'all tomorrow night at roughly 7, as close to that as I can get. See you then.